Hey folks, welcome back to Health in Tech with Unlimited with Exceptions and Amanda Nystrom. We are here to talk about what today, Amanda?
Hello there. We are here to talk about one size fits all and how that is not true.
If that were true, I'd still be svelte. And I am no longer svelte.
Well, I mean, you see one size fits all on like hippie clothes typically, and no judgment for hippie clothes. I love them. But they're like, you keep going and you keep
They
going. And it's just like
stretch.
somehow it fits every size.
All right, but I mean, this is along with our stress management and mindfulness series, right? So what do you mean by one size fits all?
One of the things that you keep asking me, not only on this podcast, but in life, is for tools and ABC lists of how to manage stress and how to get somebody to get from point A to point B in things. And while I can give you a generic answer, or answer that's, science based and it's all proven by studies and all of that, one of the things that keeps coming up in my head is it is not a one size fits all, especially with stress management, because we're all different. And I
Well,
wanted today to focus on the beauty of that because we are told that in order to do this, to manage our stress, we got to get better sleep and we got to eat better and we got to drink more water. But it's deeper than that.
okay, so first, let's be very clear. Yes, you need to get better sleep, have better diet, exercise, drink more
Yeah.
water. Okay. But that is very much the veneer on top, right? It's kind of like that's the first step.
hmm
And not necessarily, but I mean, really, you can't go wrong with more sleep, right? You just can't. The people that are, quote unquote, high performers and they're like, hey, yeah, I only sleep 4 hours a night. Yeah, you're full of it. You're not performing at the level that you could perform at if you got, say, 8 hours of sleep. And that is scientifically backed. Um, and
It
I
is really
also,
interesting as a point to counterpoint you. They've also shown with studies that certain people, it also depends on your age primarily. Like teenagers, they perform best when they have something like 13 hours sleep. Now that might be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked into that. But other like older individuals need more sleep as well, but there's weird gap in the middle. Like they can perform just as well as a teenager on 13 hours sleep as they can at their age with like 6.
so it's interesting you brought that up. And you were talking about, and you're right. If you look at the studies on adolescents and how much sleep, especially when they first enter through like 13 to 18, how much sleep that they should have, you're right. It boils down to about 12 hours for them to perform optimally. And it's actually one of the reasons why a lot of schools um, started going later, right? Where instead, because like when I was in school, you were there by 7:30, 8 a.m. And now there's a lot of schools out there like, no, 9:30, because the kids need that sleep. But what I was talking about when it comes to sleep is because we're talking about adults here, right? So we're not even talking about 25-year-olds. Those aren't adults. Those are babies. And before you laugh at me, people or get annoyed, people, that is also the science. You're not even out of adolescence until 25-ish. So even though society tells you you're an adult, you aren't, right? Is it Tommy Tomlinson, that comedian? She does a whole bit on it about, do you remember the reason you loved your 20s is because you didn't have a gut to listen to yet. You were
Yeah.
terrible in your 20s, right? And look, we've all been there. We've all been in our 20s, and we were all dumb in our 20s. If you weren't dumb in your 20s, God, you're a bore. You're probably a bore now in your 40s, right? So it's okay. But sleep, it varies. But as a general rule, they have shown that you need 6, 8 hours. And you can't even hit REM until 4-ish. Right. And REM is exceedingly important for the regeneration of your system.
I think it's interesting that you brought up that individuals are not adults until 25. And I think the reason for that is because our brain is not fully formed until we are 25.
That is correct.
which plays into what I wanted to bring up too, the science part of why one size fits all is not applicable when it comes to our stress management and when it comes to finding fulfillment and purpose. It's because our brain is different from the person next to you, right? Studies have even shown that you can have twins that grow up in the same exact household and they have different chemistry in their brain, they have different wiring. It's because all of our experiences are different and things hit us. And by that, I mean, emotionally impact us differently than the person next to us. And that is, it seems like a duh, but when you really think about it, it's actually a huge tool. And to use a term from last podcast, it's a hand up to know, just to have that awareness that, yeah, the person next to me is not going to think in the same way. And so when I try to say something and they don't understand it, I understand why.
Touching on that, because I think that's an extremely important point. One of the talks I recently gave, one of the statements was, you don't know the other person's trauma. Now, while yes, positive influences will help your chemistry, negative ones, trauma, deeply impact a person and trauma is different for everybody, right? One thing that may happen to you may just roll right off your shoulders. You're like, they're not even worth my energy, but it may mean something very deeply to somebody else. And our brother Jimmy, one of the things that he always says is assume good intention. Doesn't mean it is good intention, but it means assume good intention. So when someone says something that is hurtful or causes trauma, if you can step back and assume good intention, you might be able to take a breath and say, what did you mean by that? And then the other person, assuming they're not a complete jerk, will say, well, I meant blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, okay. And you can move forward in a positive way versus what a lot of society does today, which is basically just inflict trauma on people for the sake of inflicting trauma.
Yeah, it's almost like somebody is vulnerable and then somebody who listens to that turns that into a much bigger situation that is more damaging to the person who is originally vulnerable. It's one of the reasons I stay away from social media. Um, but assuming positive intention leads to, there's this book called The Four Agreements, and I can't remember the guy's name who writes it, but there's basically four things that if you implement into your life, your quality of life will just be so much more than it is right now. And one of them is don't take things personally. Assume the best. And it's really hard to assume the best when you're surrounded by a whole lot of negativity.
No, that's definitely true. And real quick to the side note, folks, yes, we understand that this podcast goes out on social media. YouTube is social media. What Amanda is talking about and what I'm talking about when we say we avoid social media largely is that we do not engage with dumpster fires. Right? We're not on X, we're not on Blue Sky, we're not out there seeking validation from the stranger on the other end of the wire that is likely just a bot. So on that point, with the point you just made, Amanda, assuming good intention, trying to keep positivity, that goes a long way in modern society, is being able to basically put the phone down and get rid of that input, because it allows you to be a more productive human. And we're not talking about business, we're talking about productivity within yourself.
Absolutely. And I think knowing that, well, let me give a very short case study as to the effectiveness of knowing that everybody's coming from a different place. Literally how our brain is wired is different, right? Last week, I was on a meeting with my team. Almost everybody on the team was there. And I had somebody who's really frustrated. And they asked the team, am I just being dense? Or is there some other way that I can communicate this, like this urgency to you? And immediately, because they asked the question, the team had suggestions for them to solve the problem. And one of the things that came out of my mouth, because of my science background and behavior science focus, is to educate the whole team on our brain is different. So we're going to read this entirely differently. And if you don't ask the question about Like, why are you not? Why is this not actually resonating to you on the importance level as it is to me? That we're hindering ourselves because we're just automatically assuming that they're being dense or that they're not paying attention to something that we find really important. And it just breaks down to communication. And communication is where we end up usually with most of our issues, whether it's the workplace or our relationships or even internally.
So you said the most evil word in existence in that little paragraph there. We're assuming, right? Assumptions kill. They kill relationships, they kill passion, they kill your ability to achieve because assumptions are all based on fabrication of one's own mind and not on what reality is. You cannot assume that the person read your email. You cannot assume that the person read your email and they understood what your intent was. You cannot assume that the person read your email, they knew what your intent was, and that they want anything to do with you. You have to be declarative in your communication. And asking questions is a really good way to do that. And it can be a little frustrating for some people because all of a sudden you make the assumption that this person should know what you're talking about. Why are they asking me these questions? And it's because, outside of communication theory, it's because our brains are all wired differently.
Ding, ding, ding. I do want to say two clarifying or points there. One is that we just said you have to assume the best in people. And then we say
Yes.
assumptions kill.
No. What I said was assume good intent, okay? Assuming the best in people is a surefire way to get yourself murdered in a back alley, okay? You assume good intent, and I was speaking directly toward communication, right? Because everybody communicates differently. I communicate in a very direct fashion. You communicate not so much in a direct fashion, and I often have to sit there and listen for a long time to let you work your path of communication to get to the point that you're trying to make, right? Whereas with me, my point is usually very clear, very quickly.
Yes. But your delivery is really hard for me because I communicate differently because my brain is wired differently and my experiences in the past are not what yours have been, right? So it's just having that knowledge has made, at least for me, our arguments and discussions a whole lot more productive.
Well, and you've also are much better now about something that you brought up on this episode, which is don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Right. So in relationships, one of the hardest parts of communication is that one individual or the other or both will take whatever's being said personally. And, one of the best advices that I've seen is to remember that it's not you versus her. It's you and her against the problem, right? And that's been a challenge for me because that's not how you used to perceive my communication. It's also been a challenge to me because of my own trauma that I've had. Certain things that you'll say flip it because you're a very quick wit that you don't mean any harm, right? But it is harmful because of my brain chemistry, because of the trauma that I have had in the past. And that's where on my end, in that scenario, I have to assume good intent.
I think so many of our, but also, society's issues come down to that expectation that other people know where we're coming from. And nobody can know that outside of you. And sometimes the closest people to you have more insight than the general people around you, but often we have done those things that we talked about in a previous episode where we like bury our trauma or we we don't bring things out until we're stuck between a rock and a hard place and they just squeeze their way out and then, we're doused in this anxiety cloud, right? And so like you said, knowing that my brain and how I communicate because of my brain and my experiences is different than yours allows both of us to come to the table and say, I see that you do not understand what I'm saying. Let me rephrase this. Or it allows me, if I'm communicating or misunderstanding, to instead of getting offended or upset or hurt, to say, I heard you say it this way and it hurt me because XYZ. What did you mean by that? And that changes relationships personally and professionally.
So, um, yes, but one of the things that you inadvertently touched on here, which is something that a coach like yourself is really good for. A lot of times we don't know our trauma. It's just there. And going back to the previous episode where I was uncomfortable with the quiet and I went to turn on the music and then I turned it off because I wasn't willing to be uncomfortable with the quiet. I had 7 days of working on why am I uncomfortable with the quiet? And we're not going to get into this on this, and I'm sure you're going to try and drag it out of me after this. Good luck. I haven't really figured it out, but that's what happened, right? But when it comes to a coach, I mean, people that are listening, Amanda's not a life coach, right? That's a bullshit influencer. It's not real, right? She is medically trained to help you stand where you are, where you want to be, and how to get there through your process, right? And that's incredibly powerful. And you want to know what? In the last episode, I made that statement that, like you said, really made you cringe, where 60 to 75% of the people are a lost cause. And then, and what
Brought it up again.
I did bring it up again. And then, and then we came back around with the understanding, and this will be a series in the future, which is why is it so hard to ask for help? And what I said is that a lot of these folks, they just can't ask for help. And so that becomes the dam that holds all their trauma, and there's no way for them to get past it. Okay. But what I'm saying now is that if you can ask for that help, right? That's all the evil geniuses that I was talking about, how it doesn't matter, all the upper people that people like to hate on, whether they're good or bad, and it's all subjective. I guarantee you every single one of them have a coach. Every single one. Now, it may not be a Duke medical, right? But they have advisors and peers and coaches to help them process their shit to allow them to elevate themselves beyond where they are. Every single one. So if you want to lift yourself out of wherever you are, get a coach. Any coach, preferably a good one, and obviously preferably Amanda, but get a coach.
I think too, as like a gateway to that, if you're mulling over it, figuring out if that's right for you right now, because you need to be in the right headspace too. It's not something that you should do against your will. This is going to most likely change your life in some way, shape, or form, partnering with a coach. But you have to be willing to do the work and show up. And I'm not saying it's a lot of hard work, but like you had to be willing to sit in the silence and the discomfort of that. Um, but as
That
a
was
gateway,
very difficult. It is hard work. You shouldn't lighten it like that. There are little things like, yeah, that was dumb. Let's not do that. But when you're talking about actually processing trauma, processing through trauma, that's hard work.
I did not mean to take away from that specifically. I was taking away from typically you think of trauma, processing trauma, and you associate it with therapy. With health coaching or well-being coaching, at least in my experience, it's about moving forward. And sometimes you go through some previous stuff, a lot of times that stuff comes up. But it's not about focusing on that. So it's not like therapy. It's about how do I establish a foundation to move forward so that when that trauma comes up, I can better process it in a intentional, proactive fashion instead of living on autopilot.
No, that's actually a really good point, and we've talked about this in the past in different talks and things like that, where we're not taking away from therapy. Therapy can be a very useful tool, and a lot of times it's a precursor to coaching. But what's very important to understand is that therapy is about the past, whereas coaching is about the future, the present and the future. So you have this trauma, whether you've gone to therapy or not, that you want to move through and forward. Whereas in therapy, it's about being in it, understanding it, the trauma, and then being able to move forward and progress. Right. And that's not to take away from therapy. Therapy is a very powerful tool. I've gone to therapy plenty of times. I've gone to therapy just so I could yell at somebody. Right? Because sometimes you got to yell, and the people in my life don't handle me yelling very well.
Well,
So,
it's because our brains are different,
correct.
right? One size does not fit all.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Well, I think I just gave them to you, but I think just remembering not to expect the same thing that you would expect out of yourself from somebody else is a really important tool in your professional life and your personal. And when that happens, your stress, when you acknowledge it, your stress actually goes down because you're no longer fighting against this wall that is there, but it's almost imaginary, right? And then knowing, I mean, based on what you said, asking for help is an impeccable tool and enables us to form better habits and form better relationships and be more productive, even though sometimes it's really, really uncomfortable.
Um, and let's remember that while it may reduce your stress, it also enables you to turn it to a threat based stress, to a challenge based stress. You had threat based, this object of threat based stress, this source of threat based stress because you asked for help, because you got a coach, because you went to therapy, because you built tools. You are able to shift and use those tools to make it a challenged based stress, which is good stress. It's a problem to solve and to move through. And with that, that's been another Health and Tech with Amanda Nystrom. Thank you so much for watching.